Scientists thought they understood the rules of the animal kingdom. Snakes eat rodents. Snakes eat birds. Snakes eat frogs. And every once in a while, a snake even eats another snake. But somewhere along the food chain, one detail got completely reversed, and nobody caught it until the evidence was staring them in the face. In forests of Southeast Asia, on remote Pacific islands, and inside caves in South America, researchers began finding something that shouldn't happen. Snakes weren't just failing to eat their prey. They were becoming the meal. And the predator responsible for turning that relationship upside down wasn't a bigger snake, a bird of prey, or a mammal with claws and teeth. It was a centipede. For most people, a centipede is little more than a startling shape that scurries out from under a rock or across a bathroom floor. It's the kind of creature you flinch at and then forget. But giant centipedes, the tropical species that can stretch close to a foot in length, are not the same animal as the ones hiding in your garden. These are armored, fast-moving hunters equipped with a weapon system that has no real equivalent anywhere else in the animal kingdom. And when scientists began documenting exactly how these centipedes were using that weapon system against snakes, the story that emerged was stranger and more scientifically important than anyone expected. One of the clearest examples came from Florida, where researchers with the Florida Museum of Natural History were stunned by a discovery in Key Largo. A hiker found a rim rock-crowned snake, one of the rarest snakes in North America, dead on a park trail. It hadn't been struck by a predator or hit on a road. It had died with a giant centipede still jammed in its own mouth. The centipede was found lodged partway through the snake's mouth, and researchers believe this was ultimately what killed it. Rather than dissect the specimen and risk destroying it, since the species is so rarely encountered, scientists used CT scanning technology to look inside without cutting it open at all. That scan let them build a three-dimensional model and run what they described as a digital autopsy to figure out exactly what had gone wrong. Science alert Fox Weather. What the scan revealed was a battle that the snake had almost certainly not expected to lose. There was a small wound along the snake side, most likely left by a venomous strike from the centipede as it was being swallowed. Scientists have long wondered whether snakes that specialize in eating centipedes have built up some resistance to that venom, but that's still an open question in the field. In this case, though, the venom wasn't even the deciding factor. The real cause of death was mechanical. The centipede's body had become lodged in the snake's throat and pinched its windpipe shut, cutting off its air supply and causing it to suffocate. A snake known for swallowing prey many times its own size had, in this one instance, misjudged its meal completely. As Florida Museum Herpetology Collection Manager Coleman Sheehy put it when describing the find, specimens that die mid-meal are exceptionally rare, and given how seldom this particular snake species is even seen at all, stumbling across one in this condition left the entire research team stunned. Fox Weather. That story alone would be strange enough. But it turns out this isn't an isolated event. Halfway across the world, on the island of Golem Grad in North Macedonia, a research team led by herpetologist Ljiljana Tomovic from the University of Belgrade came across something even more unsettling. While tagging reptiles on the island in 2013, the group discovered a dead nose-horned viper with the head of a centipede sticking straight out of a tear in its side. A closer examination showed that the snake's internal organs were essentially gone, with the centipede occupying almost the entire space where they should have been. The leading theory is almost impossible to picture at first. The snake had very likely swallowed the centipede while it was still alive, and the centipede had then tried to fight its way back out, damaging the snake's organs in the process before it ultimately died as well. Newsweek. What makes this scenario plausible rather than far-fetched is just how tough these animals actually are. According to the research team, adult giant centipedes of the Scolopendra genus are remarkably difficult to kill, based on their own direct observation in the field. Tomovic told reporters at the time that nobody on the team had ever witnessed anything like it before, and the case was significant enough to be written up and published. And this wasn't even the first time something like this had turned up in the historical record. Researchers pointed out that decades earlier, on a Greek island in the 1960s, hunters had come across a snake that looked unusually swollen, only to find a partially digested centipede with a broken neck when they opened it up. The pattern, it seems, has been quietly repeating itself in isolated pockets of nature for a very long time, mostly unnoticed simply because these encounters are so difficult to actually witness happening in real time. Newsweek. To understand why a small, legged invertebrate can pull off something like this, you have to look closely at what makes a centipede's body different from almost every other predator on Earth. Near the front of a centipede's body sit a pair of specialized limbs called forcipules. At a glance, they can look like fangs, but they aren't fangs at all. They are modified legs that evolved, over an enormous stretch of time, into hollow, claw-shaped venom injectors. No bite from a mouth is involved in a centipede's attack. Instead, the animal grips its target with these repurposed limbs and pumps venom directly into it, again and again, while its many other legs wrap around the body to hold everything in place. It's a combination of restraint and chemical attack happening at the same time, and it's a strategy built for exactly the kind of prolonged, close-contact struggle that swallowing a live, thrashing animal can turn into. This hunting style becomes especially dangerous for snakes because of how a snake's own body is built. Nearly all of a snake's offensive capability, its eyes, its jaws, its striking mechanism, is concentrated in the head. That's an efficient design for hunting prey that approaches from the front. It becomes a serious liability the moment an attacker is already gripping the middle of the body or has ended up inside the digestive tract altogether, where striking back becomes physically impossible. A snake that swallows a giant centipede whole isn't just eating a meal. It's taking an armored, venomous, still-moving animal directly into a part of its body where it has no way to fight back. Snake predation isn't even the most surprising part of the giant centipede story. In the limestone caves of Venezuela, a research team led by biologist Rodrigo Molinari documented something few people would expect to see, even in a nightmare. Giant centipedes over a foot long were hunting bats. The centipedes anchor their rear legs to the cave ceiling, using it as an upside-down platform, then use the free front half of their bodies to snatch bats as they fly past or come in to land nearby. It's an ambush strategy that depends entirely on patience and positioning, treating a cave ceiling the way a spider treats a web. The most striking case of vertebrate predation by these animals, though, comes from a tiny, uninhabited speck of land east of Australia called Phillip Island, part of the Norfolk Island group. There, a species known as the Phillip Island centipede, or Cormocephalus coinii, has become the subject of a major ecological study. Researchers found that these centipedes, which can grow to almost a foot long, are armored along their segments and armed with the same venomous forcipules found in their relatives, and they kill and consume thousands of baby seabirds every single year. Specifically, by preying on the chicks of black-winged petrels, the centipedes have become what researchers describe as the island's apex predator, filling a role usually reserved for large land mammals. Phys.org. The scale of that predation is difficult to overstate. Estimates from the research place the number of petrel chicks taken by the centipede population somewhere between roughly 2,100 and 3,700 every year. That's not the behavior of an occasional opportunist. That's a population functioning as a genuine top predator on its own island. Lead researcher Luke Halpin and his colleagues explained that on warm, humid nights, these centipedes move through thick leaf litter, navigating a maze of seabird burrows across the forest floor, relying on a pair of highly sensitive antennae to track down prey in the dark. Their diet turns out to be remarkably varied for an invertebrate, ranging from crickets to seabird chicks, geckos, skinks, and even fish that get dropped from the nests of a seabird species called the black noddi. Big think. What's especially interesting is why this role even opened up in the first place. As the researchers pointed out, Phillip Island has no native predatory mammals at all, so in a sense, the centipede has simply stepped into an ecological gap that would otherwise be empty. By feeding on vertebrates like seabird chicks, the centipedes are effectively pulling nutrients that seabirds bring in from the ocean and spreading them back out across the island's ecosystem, playing a role that shapes the entire local food web. And despite the sheer number of chicks taken every year, the seabird population itself isn't collapsing. Halpin noted that the black-winged petrel population is large enough that although centipede predation clearly reduces overall breeding success, the centipedes tend to only be able to catch chicks that are still young and small. Once chicks grow past a certain size, he explained, they largely stop being vulnerable, which means enough petrels reach adulthood each year to keep the population stable over time. The conversation +3. It's worth remembering that this predator wasn't always considered a major ecological force. Just a few decades ago, the Phillip Island centipede was extremely rare, and it wasn't even formally described as a distinct species until 1984. Its population has grown substantially since then, and with it, scientists' understanding of just how much influence a single invertebrate species can have on an isolated ecosystem. The conversation. Taken together, these cases from Florida, Macedonia, Venezuela, and the South Pacific are reshaping how researchers think about food chains, especially in tropical and island environments where invertebrates have historically been treated as background characters rather than major players. Snakes have spent millions of years evolving to be efficient, adaptable predators, capable of overpowering prey many times their own size. But that same evolutionary specialization, a body built almost entirely around a single striking point at the head, turns into a real weakness the moment the threat is already wrapped around the body or has ended up somewhere the head simply cannot reach. Giant centipedes, mean white, evolved something almost unique in the animal kingdom: legs that transformed into venom-delivering tools, giving a relatively small, ancient arthropod the means to take down animals that would otherwise be considered well out of its league. None of this means snakes are suddenly low on the food chain or that centipedes have somehow become the dominant predator across the animal kingdom. Most encounters between the two still go the way you'd expect, with the snake coming out on top. But often enough to be documented across multiple continents and completely different ecosystems, the outcome flips, and when it does, it forces scientists to rethink assumptions that had gone largely unquestioned for a long time. Researchers are still trying to figure out how frequently this kind of predation actually happens in the wild, since so many of these events are only found after the fact, whether through a dead snake on a hiking trail or a chance CT scan in a museum lab. There are also open questions about whether snakes in regions with dense centipede populations are gradually developing better defenses or more caution around them over time. What these discoveries really highlight is how much is still unknown about animals that most people walk past without a second thought. A creature often dismissed as little more than a household pest turns out, in its larger tropical forms, to be capable of taking down bats in midair, hunting thousands of seabird chicks a year on a remote island, and in the strangest cases, killing a snake from the inside after being swallowed alive. Nature rarely follows the simple, clean hierarchy we like to imagine, where size and reputation alone decide who's in charge. Sometimes the deciding factor is something much smaller, much stranger, and far more resilient than anyone expected. And that's exactly what makes stories like these worth telling, because the natural world is still full of relationships that scientists are only just beginning to fully understand.